So let's move on to the mix bus treatment. Got a Pro Q2 here first. This would be for some fine-tuning EQ, which I ended up not doing anything other than just rolling off some of the subsonic frequencies. The curve bender EQ, here again we have an EQ that has fixed points. The curve bender is sort of a modern adaptation of one old EMI mastering EQ. It has wonderful tone. The only thing I'm really doing with it is I'm adding a little bit of a smiley face to the whole mix picture. I've got half a dB shelf at 16K, just kind of opening the top up just a little bit, and then I have a bell curve at 70 Hertz, just boosted also a half a dB, and then we're rolling off a little bit more of the subsonic frequencies with this high pass right here. So I'm going to explain each one, and then I'll go through and turn them on and off, and maybe elaborate a little bit more on a couple of them. So like I said, there's just a little bit of smiley face extension going on with the curve bender, tightening the bottom up with the high pass filter even more. And then we have a little bit more of a smiley face going on with the Pultec, but the Pultec, the top end is not a shelf in the same way that the curve bender is. Well, I mean, you don't have to use a shelf, you can use a bell curve, but I'm using the curve bender as a shelf, and then the Pultec is a parametric, and it's centered at 10,000 cycles, which is, you know, significantly below 16K, where I'm just kind of opening the top. And this is it's a pretty wide bell curve, and you know I've got a bit of boost, so I'm getting a little bit more of that smiley face on my mix bus, and I like to approach it that way because I don't want to have to do too much individual EQing, heavy EQing on all the elements of my mix. A finished mix is always going to feel like the bottom end has been accentuated a bit and tightened up, and that the top end has been opened up, and things have gotten brighter because it helps the stereo image and the depth of things. And just by doing that on the combined balance that I have for the mix, and then just going in and managing EQs more in the mid-range and accentuating the parts of the individual things in the mid-range that I either want to boost or cut, and kind of managing it there is much easier. It also allows me to use more classic style of EQ in a broader way, and just doesn't put so much emphasis on individual EQ. It's like I can get a balance, I can kind of put the stereo EQ on things and get it much closer to where I want it to be that way, as opposed to EQing every single track. And the other thing is like EQing every single track, especially in the box mix, digital EQ doesn't quite hang together the same way as all analog EQs. I think that they sound wonderful and they're really powerful, but it's just a little bit of a different animal, and this is the best approach to me. Now, I still do a very similar thing when I'm mixing in the analog world, or I'm using analog mix bus. It's just not quite as much as maybe I'm doing here with this Pultec in terms of how much high frequencies I'm boosting, because I'm just because of the way it glues together. I don't have to do as much of that in the analog. Okay, so the mix bus compressor is the glue. It's a Cytomic the glue. It's an SSL style compressor. I have set it with a ratio at 2:1, very low ratio, the slowest possible attack, 30 milliseconds, and then the release is because this is in seconds. This is in milliseconds, 30 milliseconds. The release is in seconds. It's 0.1. It's 100 milliseconds. So it's a very fast release, very slow attack, or it's the slowest it'll go. Let me show you the last plugin first, and then I'll play you the mix and let you observe how much compression I have on the mix. Okay, the very last thing I have here is a Pro L2, and it's pretty much set stock. The main thing I'm doing with it is I'm turning down the output 0.5 dB. And I have this on the very end of my chain so that I'm not clipping where I'm printing the mix. I always print my mix in my session. I rarely ever bounce a mix externally. I always want to print my mix in my session so that I can see it, I like to have the visual confirmation. I can make playlists, different versions. I can listen to an early mix, rough mix of the song if I want to when I'm getting towards making a revised mix or finishing the final mix of a song, because that's part of the process and keeping tabs on the changes and evolution. And the way that you balance things when the production is a little bit simpler before you've fleshed it out is definitely going to be different than when you have more elements going. I mean, the rough mix that was made when it was just drums, bass, acoustic guitar is different than when the electric guitar is in and the tipple and the lead vocal harmonies. I like to print in the session so that I have all the versions of the mix that I can refer to. So let me play you the mix and show you what the mix bus compressor is doing, turn off the EQs, and just give you a little bit of preview, and then we're going to talk a little bit about automation. Let's go to the loudest part of the song here, which is going to be the last chorus. And then we'll kind of work backwards, and I'll show you like a verse and what's going on with there. But I want to kind of immediately show you what's sort of the most compression that's going on with this mix.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose? Oh yeah, if it's alright, I could stay by your side. I could hold you all night, hold you all.
And so when I was bypassing it there, the level got a little louder. Part of that is because we're not compressing any of the transients. But what I want you to hear, what I hope you hear, is that the balance of the mix doesn't change radically. The compressor is not making the mix; it's helping me glue it together. Sometimes I've observed people mixing and they're using a lot of mix bus compression. That can be appropriate and good for certain things. But if you're using compression too heavily on your mix bus, you will have less ability to change the internal balances of the mix. It's like if the mix bus compressor is in a lot of compression, like I'll just demonstrate it.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the vocal up, and you'll hear the vocal get louder, but it's going to influence the mix, it's going to influence the balance, and I'm going to have to turn it up a lot to make it louder.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left?
Okay, so I turned it up 4 or 5 dB before we heard a significant change in the volume of the vocal. Okay, versus I'm going to turn the automation back on, and I'm going to set the compressor more how I had it.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose?
And even less than half the change on the vocal, you could hear the difference. And it didn't. And the mix sort of sounded a little more open, and a little bit better balanced to me, and the transients and the sounds weren't suffering. But the main point I'm trying to make is that I'm just my feeling and practice is that you just use the mix bus compressor as a little bit of unifying glue in the same way that I showed you a little bit of some parallel compression along the way. The mix bus compressor should not be making the mix for you. It should be helping you finesse your mix. If you desire to have that really really dense feeling on your mix, what I would suggest is that you make a parallel bus for the whole mix, and blend that in the same way that I did it with the drums. You can do the same. You can do the same thing with the mix. You have to set up a little bit different routing, but that is the better way to do it, to get that really aggressive compressed sound for all the instrumentation and then blend it in with the mix. I mean, this even, this has, I'll demonstrate it without setting up all the parallel stuff. We'll go back to that really aggressive compression sound, and on this I can use the wet dry.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose?
I mean, in certain cases, certain genres of music where it's not as dynamic, where things are like in heavier rock music or electronic music, where the sounds are denser, there's less dynamic. You know, in electronic music, you're dealing with a lot more samples and things that are tones that are like keyboard tones and samples that are fuller. And so there's not as much dynamic movement. You're not gonna suffer the consequences in the same way you do on something that's so dynamic, or like a heavy rock song where the guitars are really compressed, not by compression, but like the distortion, how much distortion they have on them, because that's a kind of a form of compression, and they're frequency limited. You know, denser, heavier music, yeah, you can compress it a little bit more and not have such a trade-off. I just kind of want to talk about that a little bit and say how I would typically use a mix bus compressor, even when I am mixing electronic music or heavy rock music. I still approach it this way on my mix bus. I use what's called like a back bus or a parallel bus for my instruments. I would set up a separate send in the same way that I would send to a reverb, and send all the instrumentation to that compression bus, and then I would assign the output of that compression bus into this mix bus, and then I would blend in a little bit of that parallel, really aggressive compressed sound. I'd much rather do it that way, which is very similar to the way that I've treated the drums, than I would using a mix knob or you know, or just simply using heavy compression. So let me play a little bit more, and I'm going to turn off the EQs. I'll leave the compression in, and I'll turn off the EQs.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose?
On the curve bender, we hear the smiley face stuff come up. The Pultec EQP1A, we definitely get a volume change a little bit. The signal gets hotter through this particular plugin. So just listen to a little bit to the difference.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose?
This is a subtle amount of EQ, but you can hear the cymbals open up and the air around the vocal effects, the bass and the kick get a little deeper. The guitar doesn't sound as mid-rangey because it's got some of those other frequencies lifted around it, and then it can kind of sit in a better spot. I'll turn the EQP1A on and off.
So, what are you gonna do?
I'm going to balance the output of this just a little bit so we don't experience so much of a volume change.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose?
and we just get a little bit more of a finished sound when I turn those EQs on. And let's look at how much my peak stop limiter is working.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose? Oh yeah, if it's all...
In general, it's just catching a dB or two of the highest transients to keep me from pushing the recorded file into clipping. I don't want. It's not so much that it sounds bad to internally clip the software and the mixing architecture. To a certain point, there's enough headroom in the math and the processing that it doesn't. That's not what I'm afraid of, and that's not what I'm trying to protect against. I mean, there's things clipping in here, and it's okay. But in my final result, the thing that I'm printing to be my stereo mix, I don't want it clipping the output, because I don't want it clipping the converters. Because when the converter has to do the job of changing the signal from the digital signal into the analog signal, if it's clipping and it's in clip, it will influence the way that the converter sounds, and it won't sound as good or as transparent as full fidelity. It won't sound as intended, especially once it goes to different converters, and the different converters are handling that job of translating that clipping into an analog signal. I don't want the converter to have to think about that. I want to have a hot signal, but controlled, and avoid any anomalies that might be happening with the sound in the external converters. The one last thing that I will say about the Pro L2 and what I like to observe here is this LUFS level. This is sort of my RMS level and the average, and I like to know what's going on with that because of the different formats that are out there. Streaming is a different. They play that stuff back at a different level than they do CDs, and I want to know that I'm kind of in a spot that's just a little bit in between. I don't think that you can mix something that sounds modern and full and not be pushing a little bit past what the streaming level would be. But I want to know that I'm not overdoing it, because ultimately all they do is turn it down, and turning down a really blown up hot signal doesn't sound as good on the streaming platforms. So I just like to know what I'm doing, how hot I'm printing my mix. And when you hand off your mix to a mastering engineer, part of their job is to prepare a master that's for CD, prepare a master that's for Spotify, or if it's going to be sold on iTunes, you can do the MFIT processing. It's really their job to sort of turn it up and down a little bit to the final destination, but I want to do something that kind of hits a sweet spot in between, so that I'm giving them something good to work with. So let's just observe this level here.
So, what are you gonna do? What's pulling you through? Girl, what's left to lose? Oh yeah, if it's alright, I could stay by your side.
So as we can see, this larger bar graph here, we're floating around 13, minus 12, minus 13. I think that that's a really good target level. Probably the hottest I'd want to print something if I was going just only thinking about CD would be like minus 9. So I'm a little bit in between, and I think that that's a really good place to be. So the last thing I just want to touch on in this sort of mixing wise is you observe a little bit of automation in here. Some of it's drawn in on the toms. I said I drew that in. Not a whole lot on the drums. I do, because of the style of the song and the production, I didn't really manipulate a whole lot on the drums. If this was a heavier song, with bigger choruses for the drums, and it was meant to get more aggressive. I'd probably turn up some of the room mics for sections. I would maybe turn up some of the parallel compression. I might ride the bass a little bit more, but as you can see, the record levels are pretty consistent, and it's a very dynamic and open track, so I didn't really need to do a lot. But the parts of the song that play the more significant melodies, the electric guitars and the vocal, especially, and the vocal effects, you can see where I've got automation on them, and that automation I do with a controller, and I think that's a big part of mixing and keeping things in focus and dynamic, and that's when you as a mixer producer really get to put a little bit of a human touch on the mix and breathe some life into it, and just making those small moves and vocal rides really makes a difference. It helps the emotion of things, and you can kind of deal with some problems that you might have as well, like vocal breaths or the ends of words being too quiet, as opposed to just totally trying to kill it with compression and get it to sit so that you can just find that one level that it works. I use the EQ and compression on the vocal to get it to a spot where the volume fluctuation is not a lot. It's not where I have to make a lot of correction. The tone is stable, the sound is full, and it's hanging in the mix relatively well already, but it's just about a little bit of finesse and drawing out a few little elements. And then same with vocal effects. You can see where I've pulled down and dried up the vocals effect-wise from where I have it set for the chorus. I mean, you can see that the level that I have for the chorus is kind of the loudest level for the effects, and it's kind of the static, level for the vocals, the vocal effects. But I've sort of pulled down in the verse where the effects are, the wetness. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes I kind of set them for the verse level and then bring them up for the chorus or the bridge. Or if there's a breakdown section, bring them way down, or only have the reverb and get rid of the delay because maybe the delay is distracting. But I think it's really important to be able to perform those things. I really enjoy that. I think that's a way. I think it's a very important thing to add the feel of a performance into a mix, and I think it gets overlooked some if we're just mixing with our mouse and just grabbing sections like this and turning it up or turning it down. I mean, certainly you're making a correction and making something feel like relatively more appropriate, but you're missing out on some nuance if you're not doing some automation. And it's just like here, and with the tipple, it's like when it plays the turnaround, he plays a little bit quieter, so I have to boost it up, and just certain notes I'm kind of just accentuating. So I really encourage everyone to really, even if you're gonna automate with a mouse, turn your automation off. I put it in touch automation, and you can just grab the fader here with the mouse and do this kind of riding. Even that is better than just static balances. You're just relying on compression and processing to get the mix to sort of sit and things to work correctly. So that's my last bit of advice on sort of the mixing aspects of the production.